Our B5 week continues with the illusion of truth, and Sheridan is still concerned about the war that he knows is coming, something that he alludes to when Ivanova finds him in the war room. He's worried about what's to come. She's worried about the here and now. The quarantine has practical consequences for them. Shortage of docking fees that pay to keep this place running, for one. And as we'll hear about later this week, a shortage of necessary supplies. Parts they're not going to get elsewhere because alien parts won't be compatible. Human foods that they can't produce themselves, etc. Economic isolation is a very powerful weapon, and Clark has bashed them hard with that. What's eating at Sheridan, though, aren't those intangible futures. It's his concern about his father possibly being picked up or harassed by Clark, and him having no way of knowing. Controlling information is another way that this works. I've been saying this a long time, but let me reiterate. When I discuss things that seem political, it's not to push an agenda, it's to demonstrate tactics. If someone can control what you say or what you can hear, then that effect is enormous. These can be justified in a large number of reasonable-sounding ways. But whatever public justification might be used, in the end, people who have power want to keep it. And finding ways to control information goes a long way. People don't seek change if you can convince them that change is not needed, is for the worse, or is advanced by the insidious. And speaking of insidious, Zach finds something inside someone's crate.
What the? It's a camera.
Yes, if there's one thing cops love, it's cameras being pointed at them by private citizens. After the titles, Dr. Franklin stops Sheridan to fill him in about those frozen telepaths. We need to make a few changes since they were never meant to, keep lots and lots of people frozen indefinitely. That's, sounds kind of evil. The shadows may be gone, though, but their legacy isn't. Like those horrible things that sit on your shoulder and influence your behavior. Oh, speaking of sickening parasites, that muckraker is waiting for Sheridan. When the guy makes a fuss, Sheridan doubles down on Ivanova's threat to throw him out the airlock for his attempt at smuggling and refusing to disclose what he's brought with him, claiming he'd be turned away as a reporter.
Well, that assumption was your first mistake. We have an open door policy.
And an open airlock policy.
Commander?
I think she's hoping a conversation will go her way. Sheridan does say that he wouldn't have allowed the equipment on board, but only because ISN is nothing but a propaganda machine for a dictator. We'd have to be idiots to let you record things that you can twist in editing. So anyway, let's get on with the plot about these idiots. The reporter spins a yarn about slipping the truth through quietly, under the radar, so Clark doesn't realize that they're keeping the people informed. So it's in B5's best interest to cooperate with him and let him do a story. Admittedly, I'm colored by last episode's remark that Clark's new plan involves simultaneous work done by Psy-Corps, Night Watch, Earth Force, and the Ministry of Truth, and I would be shocked if ISN was not under the direct control of the Ministry of Truth. But I think Sheridan, for all his seeming cynicism, wants to believe in people, believe that ultimately the light drives the cockroaches away and goodness comes through. So he's perfectly willing to cooperate based on that guy's reasoning. During this, Garibaldi's working with a client. His freelance career is about finding people or things that were lost during the war. And this guy goes on about a statue that's a family heirloom. Pardon me for repeating this, but I've mentioned before that jokes JMS writes don't often come out of the mouths of actors as something funny. I mentioned yesterday that Jeremy Doyle was someone who always knew how to make JMS's lines work. Well, this guy, a literal nobody, his character's client, and he previously played human on the show, and then went on to do nothing remarkable, at least as far as IMDb is concerned. He is so in tune with JMS's voice that I was honestly wondering if maybe this actually was JMS and I just wasn't recognizing him. It's not him, but again, color me impressed. It's a small part, but this guy really nails it. Oh, Garibaldi has figured out that he's actually hollowed out the statue and filled it with valuables.
How much do you want?
500 credit deposit, 20% of everything you find inside this thing.
10.
15, and let you walk out of here without telling the Drazi you've been poking holes in the deities.
I'd listen. Green is an especially significant color to them right now. Lanier stopped by, curious about this career change, but not much time to get into it. Sheridan comes by next. He wants Lanier to show Leni Riefenstahl around the place, since it's known that Minbari do not lie. It also allows for an uncomfortable moment between him and Garibaldi, as well as a flashback to Garibaldi's time that he was locked up, when he was told that he works for them now. Whatever that means, I'm sure it's something ominous. Nothing about it sounded like good news. As for Lanier, he's a little sick of being everyone's doormat. The first stop is down below, the place where people collect when they have no work and no money, a problem that's been exacerbated by Clark's declaration of martial law. More people fall through the cracks now and wind up here. Sheridan has tried to help out with work programs to earn money by fixing the station, and Dr. Franklin is seen helping a poor woman with his free clinic. They don't actually have anything like this on Earth, because no such people are considered to exist. During this, a message comes through about cryo units being ready. Nothing about them, but it's enough for someone who wants to pull some conspiracy theories stuff, and yeah, this guy is it. Londo puts in an appearance to complain about it being too cold in his quarters. I guess there's not enough booze to solve that problem. But then it's time for Delenna and Sheridan to be interviewed. Sheridan says they only broke away from the Earth as a protest for the illegal actions of Clark, and that when he ends martial law and steps down, they'll be happy to reunite with Earth again. He also stands by his belief that Clark was responsible for Santiago's death. But the main part we focus on is Delenna and Sheridan's relationship, and while he broaches the potential naysayers, he doesn't come across as hostile over it. No, if you want hostile, you should see Garibaldi. He's prepared to set you up with a tab if you want. Garibaldi gives the reporter the cold shoulder when he swings by, but when he tempts him with a chance to speak his mind and be heard, Garibaldi finally takes him up on it. He's never been shy before, why start now? Well, the big day comes, and while Ivanova and Sheridan wait for the broadcast, she speaks of her misgivings. But Sheridan says that they'd come after them with propaganda sooner or later. They might as well find out what their angle is, and besides, they were careful to keep their answers short. There's no way this could possibly go wrong. And that was when it all went wrong. So, the news. It starts with a report on Mars held hostage. Another way of saying that they were in open revolt against the dictator.
Clark proclaimed today a planetary holiday. Curfew has been extended 2 full hours until 9 p.m. Earth Standard Time, so go out and enjoy.
Children will be given a chance to play before they'll have to go back to work in the coal mines. Also, the report on anti-Earth activities has a guy confess that, oh yeah, aliens have been working against us, and I helped them. And I am so not being forced to read whatever it takes to make the torture stop. Then he lists some of his co-conspirators so they can be dealt with. So, those good vibes behind us, let's move on to this day in history.
300 years ago today, in 1961, Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
In 1999, North American President Bill Clinton created the President's Commission on the Future. In 2018, the foundation for Luna Colony was laid in the Sea of Tranquility.
Remember they started that lunar colony and then they had to shut it down because of the pandemic? There was some bad timing all around there. Oh, by the way, if you're curious, I did a check on that Clinton thing. I thought the show might have predated it, but I wasn't 100% positive. So I entered April 12, 1999 events into Google. It turns out that Clinton is, in fact, the very first result that you get when you do that. You don't even have to put his name in. It wasn't about the foundation of the future, though. It's, quote, U.S. President Bill Clinton is cited for contempt of court for giving intentionally false statements in a sexual harassment civil lawsuit. Now, I am giving partial credit here, though, because guessing that on that date, Clinton would be the most significant event, I mean, that's damn good. Even if it's probably not the way he would want to be remembered, history is not always accommodating. General Custer is probably not pleased that his name is mostly associated with the words "last stand." This is all a sentiment that applies well to the story of Babylon 5. If this thing were any more bullshit, we would be watching it from inside of a cow's colon. It's not even misrepresenting the truth. PolitiFact doesn't have a setting for this one. This makes Pants on Fire look like a minor error in detail. He says that the humans have been mostly displaced to the depths of B5 to live in filth and squalor, while Minbari keeps them in line. And when Londo complains about the cold, it's muted, so he seems to be ordering a subservient Sheridan around. Well, the nice thing about academia is that it's so big that there is someone, somewhere, who thinks whatever idiotic thing you think is true. 1 year before Bill Clinton wished he had been starting the foundation of the future instead of what he was actually doing, a doctor published a study linking autism to vaccines after being hired to effectively do just that. Come up with this connection for us, please. And now we've had to deal with the fallout of that dipshit ever since. So it's no surprise that they have found a doctor who's willing to talk about the veterans of the Earth-Minbari War. Yeah, he's at Harvard, but guess what? If he has the right opinions and is in a dictatorship, I think being able to work at Harvard is kind of easy to arrange. Anyway, he says the veterans have an inferiority complex around aliens, like Sheridan shows here.
Some of my colleagues have compared it to the Helsinki syndrome. That's where a hostage begins to identify with his kidnappers.
The fact he mixes up Stockholm and Helsinki doesn't help his credibility with people who think with more than their medulla. Soon it shifts to the relationship between Delenna and Sheridan. This is when Sheridan learns how wrong he was about them being able to edit things to twist the truth. Starting with the fact that in the broadcast interview, the reporter is quite clearly sitting in a different room asking questions of them, to which their answers now imply that they're ready to attack the Earth, if necessary, in the name of their love. It's not helped when Garibaldi's interview is played, where he says that ever since coming back, Sheridan has had some kind of god complex and won't listen to anybody, except for Delenna and Lorien, the alien who left. He doesn't know that the reporter is piecing this together to make it seem like Sheridan has been enthralled by the human-looking Minbari, because of this seeming superiority of that superior culture. Which isn't true, of course. It's that superior alien booty. What comes next, though, shows that Sheridan has bigger problems than Garibaldi. Remember that when he was introduced, Franklin's link piped in about the cryo units? Well, someone was in a position to let the news team in to see them without permission. There's at least one tech in the room when they come in, although that could just be someone playing at being a tech. You can't take anything at face value in this video. There are way more cryo units than there's supposed to be on B5, and when questioned about them, Dr. Franklin denies no, they're not using any cryo units right now, which suggests that he has something to hide. Which he does, but it's nothing nefarious. Well, it's not our nefariousness that we're hiding. The theory the story advances is that this is a new Minbari war, that Delenna controls the emotionally compromised Sheridan, who will lead an alien fleet to Earth, changing humanity to be hybrids like her, thanks to the experiments conducted on the cryogenically frozen humans. I've been through the pandemic, and that kind of shit's crazy even by my standards. Before I close this out, I want to share an anecdote with you. A long while back, Wisconsin passed a law saying that children going on field trips could only be transported in school buses, not in cars anymore. Parental volunteers for small classes, driving everyone there in their cars? Nope, they had to get a bus, regardless of the expense, even if they couldn't afford to do it. If they couldn't, they could not go. Whether you agree with this law or not, that doesn't matter. What does is that when the story happened, it was a Wisconsin station that was looking to do a piece on it, and the producer knew someone who knew my father well enough to know that he is perfectly happy to share his opinions on education. So he gave his argument about it, essentially asking if anyone knew the statistics for accidents and fatalities for field trips in cars versus buses, because everyone kept comparing school bus accidents versus all car accidents, when clearly all car accidents doesn't encompass when I have a few kids buckled in my car, going to the zoo. Whether you agree or not, it doesn't matter. His whole point was that education opportunities were being denied to kids for reasons that very well could have been simply to line bus companies' pockets. Well, the news story talked all about how an area teacher felt that school buses were unsafe, followed by an expert who assured that school buses are safe. The only thing they had him saying during the piece was that school buses don't have seatbelts for kids in them like cars do, which he only brought up as a tangent to his point. But as he told me later, I'm sure glad I watched that show so I could find out what I think. Nothing happened to him as a result of this. It's not like he was canceled or anything. Unless you want to count me further not trusting anything a journalist tells me, there was no fallout from it. I bring it up, though, because that very thing was what was on JMS's mind with this episode. He had a journalist's background and knew all these tricks that they used and was shining a light with this episode. Like I said at the beginning, my goal is not to change your political views, but to expand your awareness of technique. And the reason I do this often with B5 is because this is what JMS was doing with B5. It wasn't about my team or your team. It was about the way the rules worked and the way that people would cheat those rules sometimes. I consider this episode to be slightly important, if only to show the rift between Sheridan and Garibaldi and where it began, though even that is repeated later on this week. I give it a stamp of watch it once, in that it is really uncomfortable, but I still think you should see it. JMS said some journalist professors asked permission to show this episode in their classes to discuss ethics. Because keep in mind that nothing that was done here was something that only could happen in an authoritarian government. This could have been done in a completely free society. All it takes is a willingness to tell your story with no regard for the truth. And that's a bit of education you don't need a field trip to learn.